bulletin is from the Press Radio Bureau.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Hello and welcome back to the FrameLab podcast. Hey, George.
Hey, Gil.
So there's been a lot going on in the past few weeks, almost too much to consider. It's been like drinking from a fire hose, from Stormy Daniels to Michael Cohen to Trump dropping bombs on Syria and then not telling his lead diplomat at the UN, Nikki Haley, that he was not going to impose the Russia sanctions that his own administration had recommended. What do you make of all this madness and chaos? You had said that Trump had no end to chaos. So what do you see us heading toward here?
Well, I think we're heading toward a very interesting time where there is a lot of threat to Trump, whether it's threat from the Mueller investigation or the investigation of Michael Cohen, etc. But I think that he is under threat, and he knows it. And that leads us to a very interesting thing. Trump works by a metaphor that he is the nation, the president as the nation. And therefore, anything that threatens him as the president is a national security threat. And so when Michael Cohen's office was broken into by the FBI, that was seen as a threat to national security by Trump. Why? Because it's a threat to him. And as long as he sees himself as the nation, any threat to him is a threat to national security. And that goes back for some time. You recall that when Scaramucci was in the White House, he wanted the FBI to investigate all leaks from the White House as national security leaks, even though they were all leaks about things that were threatening to Trump. You know, that only makes sense if you assume that the president is the nation.
You wrote about this last August. You wrote an essay on Medium called "The President is the Nation." And at the time, I'll admit, I didn't understand why you were so fascinated by this idea and by this metaphor. But it has become increasingly clear that this idea, this metaphor that Trump uses, president as the nation, himself as the very meaning of America, has become more important in his thinking and in how we perceive it. And other people, you know, the pundits who are always slow to figure things out, are starting to now say, does Trump think that he is the only thing that matters in America? So what does it mean in terms of democracy for a president or his cronies to see the president as the nation?
Well, it's like having a dictatorship, basically. It means that other means of checking the president, after all, we have a system of checks and balances. Any checks on presidential power is seen as a violation of the Constitution, as being anti-American, against the unpatriotic, and so on. So that's one obvious place where that's the case. Any law enforcement agency, like the FBI or the CIA or whoever, is seen as going against the nation, as giving up on national security and not doing their job, for protecting the nation, and so on. That is part of what Trump is saying. It's what he's saying about the FBI. That's what he's saying about the people in the New York office, and so on.
And that's one of the places where even if you're a Republican, not an extreme Republican, to see the FBI and law enforcement and our intelligence agencies under attack by the president, these are all Republican people. You know, Jim Comey, Republican, Robert Mueller, Republican, Marine. These are the kinds of people that Republicans tend to revere and respect and throw all of their support behind. So for the very legitimacy of law enforcement to be questioned or undermined because the president takes precedence over everything, it seems like a real tell in terms of that this is how they think, this is the mentality they've adopted. So what else can we expect them to think if they actually believe and think that the president is the nation?
Well, let's take Congress for a minute. Um, you know, the majority leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, has said that he does not want to have legislation that would protect Mueller and the Mueller Commission. And he just gives the excuse saying, well, Mueller is not really threatened. There's no point to this legislation, etc. But there's even though he knows that if that came up in the Senate, it would probably pass, because if people didn't vote for it, then they might lose the next election. So the question is, why is it that Mitch McConnell is taking this position? And the position is pretty easy to understand. In strict father morality, which is what we've talked about a lot, where the father is an authority in the family, this maps onto the nation. And the idea there is that strict father morality is what governs conservatism. In conservatism and strict father morality, the highest value, and in the family, is preserving the authority of the father, and hence the authority of conservatism itself. That is why, for example, when Obama was president, if he took conservative positions, say the Affordable Care Act, which was originally a Republican suggestion, the Republicans attacked him on it. Why? Because if he got credit for it, it would hurt conservatism. And this is a general thing that has happened throughout the use of Republican power in the Senate and the House to stop Obama and the Obama administration. But it also says that they want to keep that conservative power which they have under Trump, because Trump has strict father morality, and he is a sort of a cover for what is happening in Congress.
So the president as the nation metaphor is essentially just a playing out in a very direct way of strict father morality. And you've made a list of the ways in which this plays out through all the parts of our political system. Do you want to kind of share some of that, and we can talk about some of the points you make?
Well, for example, Trump assumes that senior government officials who are supposed to serve the nation and who take an oath to serve the nation, he assumes that their job is to serve the president. Jeff Sessions is the most obvious case, where he was furious at Sessions for recusing and refusing to just protect the president. Whereas Sessions...
Same thing now with Rosenstein.
Same thing with Rosenstein. He's a Republican appointee, and the assumption is, well, he's there to serve the president. And so the metaphor of the president as the nation says anybody who's serving the nation should be protecting the president. And then there's the question of swearing allegiance. You swear allegiance to the country, and what Trump wanted Comey to do was to swear allegiance to him. Whereas, again, the president is the nation. Comey said, I serve the nation. I serve the truth.
That was a pretty direct request there to do that. And now Comey's been getting, he seems to have a special talent for drawing the ire of Donald Trump. With his new book being out, his descriptions of Trump's been attacking him nonstop on Twitter. So, but it all started off, if you think about it, with Comey refusing to swear that allegiance in the way that Donald Trump wanted it sworn on a personal level.
Well, for example, if you believe this metaphor, then the president could not possibly obstruct justice, because he is justice.
Didn't Richard Nixon say something along those lines?
That's exactly what Nixon believed.
If the president does it, it's not illegal.
If the president does it, it's legal.
You were there. I wasn't. So
I was there. If the president does it, it's legal. And, that only holds if you believe that the president is the nation.
What else follows from this?
Well, so, for example, the Mueller investigation can show all sorts of cases where Russia has something on Trump. Could be money laundering, connections to the mafia, of all sorts of things, in addition to the obvious, salacious tapes and so on. But if the president is the nation, then the president is defending national security. If he tries to be good, kind to Russia, to not impose more sanctions and so on, what that says is he's doing that to preserve good relationships between him and Russia, and hence between the country and Russia. So he's acting in favor of national security instead of against it. So
in his mind.
In his mind.
When actually what he's doing is sacrificing what's good for the country for his own personal
exactly
benefit, if you look at this with clear eyes.
But under this metaphor, that cannot happen. Mm-hmm. So in his mind, that cannot happen.
And the minds of those who are preserving his power, right? Because it's not just Trump. I mean, he's acting as a regime here.
Well, the people who are preserving his power may be acting according to the metaphor, but not necessarily believing it. I think he believes it. I think that he really takes it for granted that this is true and acts naturally that way. I think other people figure it out. So there are other kinds of things. So, for example, what about the press? When the press gets too close, when the press reveals news that threatens Trump, he sees the press as the enemy of the people. That is, the press is saying not only fake news for that, because notice it has to be fake for this. If the press says it's working in favor of the nation and against Trump, that can't be true under this metaphor. So it has to be fake. So if Trump believes this metaphor, then anything that the press does to characterize truths that are important to the nation but that threaten Trump are really threats to the nation.
So the truth is a threat to the nation under this metaphor.
The truth.
Anything true that undermines Trump's claim to sort of the legitimacy or complete sovereignty to be the most important power in the land.
Even worse, they're not truths. They're fake news. That is, that if you believe and fix the idea that the president is the nation, then you cannot have any news whatever or any truths that are possible that would be good for the nation and bad for the president. That is an impossibility, so that must be fake news.
And it was just tax day, so the same goes for his tax returns, right? Revealing his tax returns is a threat to
him, and therefore a threat to the nation, right? So he's not going to reveal his tax returns because he's protecting the nation. So all of those things follow in an obvious way to him. That it is not, even questionable for him. And then what about the fact that Hillary Clinton got 3.5 million votes, more than he did? He has to say that that's false. He has to not threaten his legitimacy because it would threaten the legitimacy of the election in general. So what he's doing is saying, well, there must be 5 million people who voted illegally. And he makes that up to fit the metaphor of the president as the nation.
This does seem a lot like the kinds of things that dictators in other countries do. Kim Jong-un, the ruling North Korean family, had a whole mythology about the grandfather being born on a mountain from the hand of God, essentially. So this idea that Trump is infallible is what this metaphor sets up. So he could not have been the loser of the popular vote because that doesn't fit with the strict father metaphor. It doesn't fit with the president is the nation metaphor. He would like to stop us from talking about Russia, about the criminal investigations, about the payoffs of the porn stars and the Playboy bunnies, because these things make him look weak and bad as a person, and therefore in his mind are actually attacks on the nation, which is what he called it when Michael Cohen's office was raided. It was considered an attack on the nation, which usually we reserve for something a lot bigger than the police and law enforcement raiding of real estate developer's personal lawyer. What did you see in this characterization of the raid on Michael Cohen's office?
Well, what that says is it's a threat to the president, and therefore a threat to the nation. That is, it should be seen therefore as illegal and immoral, and a threat to national security, and that's what he said. That everything's broken down. So that is a crucial thing to understand. And then there's the emoluments clause, the fact that Trump is getting rich on the presidency. And this is something, if you just think about it, suppose you believed completely that the president was the nation. The emoluments clause wouldn't make sense. Why? Because if the president got rich, the nation would get rich. Nothing wrong with the nation getting rich. So if you take Trump's hotel in Washington, and there are all these foreign leaders staying at Trump's hotel to gain favor with Trump, that is not, an emolument or anything like that, or anything unconstitutional.
According to him.
According to him, and from his point of view. From his point of view, the point of view of this metaphor, the nation is the president is the nation. They're just staying at the National Hotel, the one that is most convenient for them, that serves the nation best.
Well, to be clear, this is not something Trump is making up or inventing. This is how banana republics and dictatorships have long worked. The families of the dictators get rich. Mm-hmm. Everything is based on turning their power into profit. Look at Vladimir Putin. Some say he's the richest man in the world, and he spent most of his life in government as an intelligence agent in the KGB. So the use of government to build the private personal fortune of the dictator is the main reason for having dictatorships and banana republics. And so in a way, the president of the nation is a serious threat. The president is the nation metaphor is a serious threat to democracy.
Well, this is certainly true in Russia, where Putin just says he shows that Russia is strong. As long as he is in charge, then Russia is strong because it's led by a strong leader. And that is his version of the president is the nation. In China, we have President Xi, who has now declared himself president for life. Well, the president is the nation. He's obviously president for life. How could he not be? And anything that's good for him and his corrupt cronies around him is good for China. It's good for capitalism in China and so on. So this is something that is not just true in banana republics, but also in Russia and China, major countries, major powers. In Turkey, it's the case.
Authoritarian powers.
All authoritarian powers.
So it's a trend, and Donald Trump is trying to get America on trend with the authoritarian president is the nation.
Absolutely. Same is true in Hungary and Poland.
So how do we beat this metaphor? What do we need to do to make people aware of what's happening, and how do we undermine it? What's the answer?
To undermine it, you have to separate the president from the nation. So you have things like no one is above the law, starting with the president, right? That would make no sense if the president was the nation, because then the president would be the law, right? So no one is above the law, including the president, says that. That's a traditional view. It's been there from the Constitution on, yet, it does undermine this metaphor. Other things undermine the metaphor. Separation of powers. The fact that the courts and the Congress have separate powers co-equal with the executive branch. That undermines the idea that the president is the nation. It says there are other powers, sources of central power, equal power within the nation, and that those people in those institutions have a responsibility to the nation, not to the president. Now, this is tricky in Congress these days when it's run by Republicans, because the Republicans are getting everything they wanted on the which comes out of strict father morality. That is, they want all the conservative views are being fulfilled with Trump as president. Trump is helping them do that. And so they want to keep Trump as president. And so the metaphor of the nation, president is the nation, serves the interests of Republicans in Congress. That's an important thing to understand when you're talking about Republicans in Congress versus Republicans in general in the country, which is a very different kind of thing. So because Republicans in the country could be partly progressive on lots of things, and whereas in Congress they've got to be strictly conservative. So that is another very important part of this whole story. Or take the following case. Take the issue of global warming. Now, what happens in the moral hierarchy of conservative thought, that is, of the strict father hierarchy, the rich is above the poor, employers are above employees, etc. That is, laissez-faire capitalism has reign. It reigns in the country. And that is exactly what Trump has been supporting and what Republicans in Congress have been supporting. Well, it turns out that if you believe that there really is global warming, as 97% of the scientists point out, and if you believe that we have to stop it, that it's imminent, that it's already happening, that climate disasters are because of humanly caused global warming, and we have to stop drilling and so on, that would cut into profits of corporations. It would go against laissez-faire capitalism. It would go against the very notion of what the strict father hierarchy says. Well, you can't go against that in conservatism. Conservatism is dedicated to preserving that, and so Trump is also dedicated to preserving it, as well as the Republican Congress is. So you've got to have Republicans in Congress, as well as Trump, saying there is no humanly caused global warming. Drill, baby, drill.
But how do we undermine the frame in there? Because global warming is one of the issues. There are many other issues on which what the president of the nation metaphor enables is for one man to be more important than everybody else, and for that man to act on behalf of, in the interest of, the few instead of the many. So he acts on behalf of corporations and their profits. He acts on behalf of the small groups of racists and other groups that support him, his extreme base. And so really it comes back to the president is the nation undermines democracy and undermines the public good for the majority of people under the guise of a system of government where only one person really matters, and what he decides is good for everybody, whether or not that's true.
Right. And that also applies to voting. It applies to voting in a very important way. Right now, you have voter ID laws, which are attempts to keep Latinos and African Americans and many poor people from voting, because they would not vote to keep Trump and the Republicans in power. So what that has led to is laws that allow you to check voting rolls across the states, and therefore to eliminate from voter rolls people who have names similar to names of other voters in other states. And the way this has been carried out under Chris Kobach, who was the voting law czar set up by Trump, but who has been running these cross-state checks on voter rolls. What he has done is to go through voter rolls and see who has common Latino names. Garcia. You see a Jose Garcia here, a Jose Garcia here, there. One of them must be false. We get rid of the extra Jose Garcias, etc. You go and you see the name Washington, and you know that most people who have the last name as Washington are African Americans. And you see, a John Washington here and a John Washington there. Well, one of them must be a false voter, and you get rid of them, even if they have different middle names. You ignore the middle names. this is how that's being carried out in getting rid of African American and Latino voters.
So the president is the nation metaphor extends to mean that anybody who doesn't support the president doesn't get to be a real American. And any tactics we use to get rid of you, to not let you vote, to take away your power, follow under that metaphor. The president is the nation, and people who support the president are the real Americans, and everyone else, we're going to take away your rights, undermine your voting abilities, and once again, we have this major threat to democracy under the and putting us under the impression that what the Republicans are really trying to do here under Trump is instill a more authoritarian style government like we see in Russia. So I think what I hear you saying, George, is that one of the most important things we can do to try to undermine this is to name what is happening, to make it clear that we see that, and to make it clear that that is an assault, a dangerous assault on American values.
That is, you look at every case where there is a difference between supporting the nation and supporting the president. Look wherever it is, whether it's in voter rolls, whether it's in healthcare, any place at all. Look at where the difference is and talk about that difference out loud and say, we are for the nation, and it doesn't matter. The president is not for the nation.
This is a government of, by, and for
the people.
Now we're going to switch gears here. We just talked about the president as nation metaphor, but we're going to talk about another really important topic that's been in the news a lot in recent weeks, and that is Cambridge Analytica, the company in England that went around claiming it had really done more than anyone to swing the election for Donald Trump after harvesting over 50 million data from over 50 million Facebook users through personality tests and other kinds of tricks to try to develop psychographic profiles of voters and figure out how to sway them or swing their votes to more conservative views. By the way, this is a practice they also claim to be carrying out in multiple other countries, where they've done things like create fictional scandals. In the American presidential race, they claim to have really created the terms the wall and the swamp. There's a lot of question, though, about whether or not a lot of the claims they make are true and how effective they actually were. Andy Kroll, in a big, amazing story in Mother Jones, sort of says that they were not as effective as they said they were. Some people would say they were not very effective at all, but that they actually were very effective in getting Republican campaigns to pay them millions and millions of dollars to do services that in some cases, according to Mother Jones magazine, never materialized. However, we'll let people read those stories for themselves and sort of figure out all the twists and turns in the narrative of Cambridge Analytica. But the more important point here, George, is something that the proprietors of Cambridge Analytica say very clearly and acknowledge, something that kind of connects with your work. Here's a quote from one of the higher-ranking officials at Cambridge Analytica, captured on an undercover camera by Channel 4 in the UK. This could have come straight out of Don't Think of an Elephant. Here's the quote. "It's no good fighting an election campaign on facts." George, you've been saying this, something similar to that, for a very long time. What's the most important thing you think people need to realize about what the Cambridge Analytica scandal can teach us?
Well, there's a big difference between our discussion of facts in election campaigns and the Cambridge Analytica's, but there's also a similarity, and the similarity has to do with the fact that we don't really think using Enlightenment reason, and let me tell you what that has to do with campaigns on facts. The Enlightenment reason says that all thought is conscious. We now know it's probably as much as 98% unconscious. Consciousness is very small. Enlightenment reason says that people reason by logic, as if almost like mathematical logic and proving theorems or something, but they reason by just normal, like mathematical logic. This isn't true. People reason in terms of frames, conceptual metaphors, narratives, emotions, imagery, and so on, as anybody who studies advertising can tell you. That's how people really reason. So the question is the difference between real reason and what is called Enlightenment reason. And folks in the Democratic Party tend to believe in Enlightenment reason. And that's an important thing. And there's a difference between Enlightenment reason and Enlightenment institutions. And I think we want to say that Enlightenment institutions are things like Congress, things like scientific institutions, and so on, in industry institutions, and so on, all sorts of other institutions that you find in a democracy. Those are very important things. Enlightenment reason has to do with how individuals actually think, and they don't think according to what Descartes said.
How do they think?
They think in terms of frames. We were talking about framing all the time, and values particularly. That is, frames ultimately are there because they represent values in politics. All politics is about morality and about your moral values. Why? Because if any political leader says, here's my position, my policy, do what I say, the assumption is that it's right and not wrong or irrelevant. And if it's right, it's got to be about your values. And your values are part of your identity. Everybody wants to think that they do what's right, or at least try to do what's right. And that means that in their very identity, their values play a huge role. Now, the question about elections is that elections, therefore, are about values. And the facts may or may not reflect values. Facts are important. It's not that they're irrelevant. They're important when they affect moral values and have moral consequences.
So one of the things you've been saying for decades is that conservatives excel at using science and technology to try to win at politics. They have accepted the science of communications. They understand that there are deeper mechanisms at work in the brain, in human psychology, and that Enlightenment reason, trying to convince people only with facts, only with what's reasonable, is not what works. In this case, though, it seems that with Cambridge Analytica, they were trying to use a different method to reach people. They were using psychographic research, psychographic profiles, creating sort of a basic psychological profile of a potential voter and attempting to use those facts, those mechanisms of a person's supposed psychological profile to manipulate their vote. Do you think that psychographic research, which is used in a lot of marketing, is the same thing as determining a person's values?
It's not the same thing, but they're related, and they're related in an interesting way. The psychographic profiles have to do with things like, are you open to new experiences? Are you introverted versus extroverted? Are you neat versus sloppy? Things like that. What is your personality like in terms of variables like that? And that has come out of research in the universities, even especially the tests used by Facebook. 270,000 people took a personality test on Facebook, and that test was devised by one of my colleagues at Berkeley. Now, what they did with the test was take the results of that personality test, whatever they were, and compare them to the general statistical results coming out of Facebook, what was on Facebook, so that they could see from the personality test answers and the Facebook answers what their personalities are going to be like, and therefore what they could market to people. Now, the basic metaphor, both used by Republicans in general and often by Democrats too, is that candidates are products in elections, and they use marketing techniques to sell products, namely to sell candidates. And Cambridge Analytica was using that metaphor as well as the Republicans were using it. But they were using it on the basis of psychographic data and correlations with 50 million profiles coming off of Facebook. That enabled them to predict whether somebody was going to be likely to be, one, a likely voter, two, whether they were going to be conservative or liberal or neutral or somebody who could be persuaded. And then it allowed them to target those people with different ads to sell different electoral products.
But is picking your president a little different than picking your toaster or picking your car?
Not to many of the people running campaigns. It is in terms of citizenship. It is in terms of what is good for the nation, as opposed to what is good for the president or some candidate or some party. But what happens is that the people who advise on elections are people who generally work for advertisers. That is, they're people who are in PR, public relations. Strategists in elections come from public relations firms in general. The pollsters are the same people who use the same polling techniques in polling for products. They make most of their money not on elections, but on working for people who are selling products. So it's almost inevitable that American elections are going to come down to seeing candidates as products to sell, and that sales techniques are going to be used in those things, and they don't work by Enlightenment reason or by logic or by just conscious thought. Now, part of Enlightenment reason says that if everybody has the same reason in terms of logic and conscious thought, then if you just tell them the facts, they all ought to reason to the same conclusion. And that just isn't true. It has never been true. It continues to be false. But the Democrats keep just saying, oh, here are the facts, here are the facts, here are the facts, rather than here are the values, and here are the facts that fit those values. Here are the facts that are important for those values. Here are the values that make this fact morally important and have this consequence morally. They don't say that. They just give the facts.
And the main fact seems to be Trump is bad, which is exactly what got Trump elected, it seems.
Exactly. And this is something that's very important to understand. There's a study done by the Rand Corporation of techniques used by the Russian trolls and by ISIS in their communications. And they found three things. One, it's important to frame first, to get your framing out there first. Two, it's important to repeat it and have your framing repeated by as many different kinds of people as possible. And three, it's important to get someone to attack you. Because just as in Don't Think of an Elephant and Nixon saying, I am not a crook, when you negate something, you activate the thing you negate first in order to inhibit it. And that just makes it stronger. So attacking is important. So when you attack and you say Trump is bad, or during the Clinton campaign, they would just have videos of Trump saying outrageous things. That just helped Trump. It got his name across. It got his ideas across.
Those are three important points. I think there was a guy back in the 90s who wrote a book about that, or maybe in the 2000s, George Lakoff, Don't Think of an Elephant. When I read that list of the 3 points that the ISIS trolls and the Russian trolls were using, it was shocking because it was exactly the points that you make in the opening of Don't Think of an Elephant. And so, again, like with Cambridge Analytica, like with the Russian trolls and ISIS trolls, we see that the anti-democratic forces that are supporting authoritarian figures like Donald Trump have fully embraced the use of cognitive science, psychology, social psychology, whatever you want to call it, psychological techniques, brain science to manipulate voters. They know that you're not going to win by sitting there reciting the issues. And there was an interesting line from, I think, the Guardian story, one of the Guardian stories about Cambridge Analytica, which is that they're using military techniques, strategies, and technologies to manipulate the civilian population. And that's a pretty terrifying idea. That doesn't seem very American.
They're also using academic research in general. For example, big data analysis and machine learning, which comes out of academic research, and they're using it for conservative purposes. This is a very interesting thing at the same time as they're trying to cut budgets for university research and budgets for graduate students. But they are weaponizing these. And I think the term weaponizing is important. That is, they see this as war. It's a war of conservatism versus progressive thought. It's a war for authoritarian regimes as opposed to democracies. They see that as a war, and that language and thought are weapons, and that ideas coming out of the universities are weapons.
Speaking of weapons, here are two of the terms that are often used in conjunction with Cambridge Analytica and other projects like it that come straight out of military warfare and terminology. The first one is psychological operations or PSYOPs, which are defined as planned operations to convey selected information and indicators to audiences to influence their emotions, motives, and objective reasoning, and ultimately the behavior of governments, organizations, groups, and individuals.
Well, that's right. These are PSYOPs. No question about it. And they've been PSYOPs for a time, starting back in 1994 with the use of the Leadership Institute, setting up operations all over the country, training people to think and talk conservatively, and then booking them all over the country by the tens of thousands to repeat talking points, conservative talking points, day after day on talk radio, on local venues, and so on. This has been going on for well over 20 years, almost a quarter of a century, and it works.
That brings us to the second term, which is information dominance, which is the degree of information superiority that allows the possessor to use information systems and capabilities to achieve an operational advantage in a conflict or to control the situation in operations other than war while denying those capabilities to the adversary. The things that come to mind immediately are things you've talked about a long time: the Leadership Institute, the Republican think tanks, which exist to create Republican speakers and intellectuals who then go out there and flood the airwaves that are always available for an interview, are constantly publishing columns to influence people's thinking. Fox News, which has completely transformed cable television, basically turning this huge station into a state propaganda organ under Donald Trump, and during the time that Obama was in office, basically being the complete propagandistic opposition, which helped really launch Donald Trump with the birther movement. Speaking of a psychological operation, the idea that people are out there campaigning to tell everybody that the president is not an American is a pretty shocking way to manipulate the emotions and minds of people who might be willing to believe that because the president is at odds with their political beliefs. Sinclair Broadcasting, speaking of
Absolutely.
Information dominance, we have certain people on the Democratic side who spend a lot of money putting ads on TV. Republicans are buying the stations. What do we make of psychological operations and information dominance in conjunction here in 2018?
First of all, it's no accident. This was set up in 1971, at the height of the Vietnam War, by Lewis Powell, just before he went on the Supreme Court, appointed by Nixon. Powell was one of the major lawyer for the business community, and he was asked to write something about the state of conservative business practices. And he wrote a memo called the Powell Memo, which you can look up on the web. And what he said was that at the height of the Vietnam War, the best and brightest of our students do not want to become conservative businessmen. This is a disaster for business in the country, and we need to change this. What we need to do, he said, was get rich conservative business people to endow chairs in major universities to teach conservative business practices. Hence the Olin Chair at Harvard, for example, and various other chairs at Stanford and other major universities. Then he said you want to also have them endow institutes at these places, the Olin Institutes. And then he set up think tanks. He said, get our best intellectuals, pay them well, and so on, but also make sure that they can get out there. How do they get their ideas out there? One, you pay them and have lots of assistants. Two, you set up magazines and book publishing operations, which they did. And third, buy media, which is Sinclair going around the country buying media. And that was set up in 1971, and it's been carried out.
Yeah, so all the way from the Powell memo to Cambridge Analytica to the future, which will be artificial intelligence trolling, the ability to maximize influence without even having a human being sitting there doing it.
But you also see it in Trump every day. Trump knows how to dominate the media. That's why I did that analysis of his tweets. When you say that he has 4 types of tweets: one, establish the frame first; two, if he's being threatened, to divert attention, attack the football players taking a knee or somebody else. 3, blame somebody else, blame the news media, blame the Democrats for no DACA, etc. Blame somebody else. And 4, set up trial balloons. Say something really outrageous to see what the pushback will be. And if there's not much pushback, then he's free to do anything he wants. These are his 4 techniques. He does it with all of his tweets. And what it does is it dominates the media, because the media assumes that its job is to report on what the president says. And as soon as they have to report on what the president says, he can manipulate them via those tweeting strategies into having him dominate the airwaves.
And by the way, we were all distracted from the dramatic raid on Michael Cohen's office by bombs dropping on Syria. So would you say that Trump has the potential to use bombs in the way that he's used tweets?
Of course. That is, they are diversions. There are other news that has to be covered, so it's diversions. That's what he does. And he knows how to do it. He knows how to do it every day. And the news media just falls for it. And I was asked by people who run On the Media, Brooke Gladstone and her colleague, to say, what do you do to cover Trump? And my answer to that is, first figure out what he's trying to hide, how he's trying to manipulate the media to not tell the important truths of the day. Then you start always, once you figure that out, by saying what the important truth is. And it's not just one fact. An important truth has a historical background, it has complexities, it has a moral basis and moral consequences. So you start there by saying, what is the most important truth that he's trying to avoid? Then you can say, notice what he said today, it contradicts the truths we've just seen. It just isn't, what he has said is false. And then you spend about 15 seconds at most on that and go back to the important truths.
So what do we do about information dominance in the age of Cambridge Analytica? Are Democrats going to have an answer to this?
Not the way they're setting things up right now. Right now, they don't have an answer to this. What they need to do first is to be able to find out who their voters are. They don't even know who their voters are and what their voters believe. Secondly, they need to give the voters the information to undermine the metaphor of the nation as president, the president as the nation, to undermine that, to separate out what's good from the nation from what's good for the president and what's good for the Republican Party. So there are lots of ways to do that, but it's information that needs to be gotten out there. And then in terms of elections, they need to know what their voters believe and what they need to say in particular districts to help them win. They need to know that, and they need to know what values there are in those districts, what they have to undermine and what they have to support.
I think I got an email from Tom Perez yesterday, a spam email, and the subject line was, "I'm worried." Is that a winning message?
It's a terrible message. It's a disaster, and they keep saying this. They keep saying, terrible things are happening. We're losing. Send money. We're losing. Send money. No, you don't send money to losers. You send money because you can win.
Well, I guess, somebody's done some study that says if you scare people, you'll get $5. But is $5 what you really want in order to demoralize your own side?
That's exactly the point, Gil. You hit it right on the button. Yes, you might be able to get them to send $3 or $5 this time, or a number of times, but you get them all the time, and they're asking for the wrong thing. And this is really important. So, for example, I get from a great congressman, I won't mention, a terrific analysis of what is going wrong right now and what needs to be done. Then he says, send money, send $5, donate now. And what he really needs to be doing, and what everybody needs to be doing, is to say, go on your Facebook page, your Twitter page, your website, and say the following things. Get the following ideas across, and here's why. You get these ideas across because they separate the idea of the nation from the idea of the president and the idea of the Republican Party. You get these ideas across, and they can be gotten across in the following kinds of messages for the following reasons, and the reason for that is they fit a moral profile. All of these messages are not there to manipulate people, but to say, here's what we believe, including saying exactly what your general beliefs are and what your moral beliefs are, and what, if you're in the Democratic Party, what the Democratic Party stands for morally. You don't hear anything about it. You get lists of issues. You get lists of things that you're in favor of that you think that are going to be good for you, not what this party stands for.
Buy this magazine or we'll shoot this dog. I think that was a famous ad campaign from the 1970s. We have a few questions here, George. Most of them are about Cambridge Analytica stuff. The first one is from Eric Dossie, and we may have already kind of covered this answer. Eric asks, Dr. Lakoff, regarding the recent drama over Cambridge Analytica, are you concerned about what has essentially become the weaponization of moral psychology on such a massive scale? Do you feel like that in and of itself is part of the problem?
Well, it's not good. There is a question of how effective it was and whether Cambridge Analytica did as much damage as we think they did. And they may have. We don't know. But they're certainly trying, and they can be getting better at it. And if you take the Rand Corporation study I cited before, which is basically coming directly out of Don't Think of an Elephant, basically the Russian trolls and other terrorist organizations and so on know how to do it. Frame first, repeat it over and over, have many people repeat it, and get someone to attack you.
And the Russian trolls apparently did have an effect. And while that's separate from Cambridge Analytica, it's hard not to see a weird parallel nature or similarity between the two. I don't think that link has been proven yet, but it certainly seems that the Russian trolls had their own version of this kind of psychologically sorted manipulation happening, and they may have been a lot more effective to some degree. I mean, they were able to organize rallies in the United States based on false Facebook pages that people thought were either conservative or, in other cases, progressive or liberal leaning. So there is a question there. But the important point, like you said, George, is that we know they're trying it. And you can't win if you don't play, and they certainly are playing. The next question is from Zoe Combs, who always asks really great questions. So I'm going to read this one here. Zoe asks, Alexander Nix and Cambridge Analytica do agree with you that it is more powerful to make politics a discussion of morals, or as Nix says, play to their psychographic profile rather than their assumed views based on demographics. It seems that they have just digitally amplified the kind of conversation you want us to have, one that is moral. Cambridge Analytica has been solidifying a strict father morality, but I think the same solidification and amplification could happen for a nurturing parent view of the world. If so, that's like white hat actor versus black hat actor, but using the same technique. Some say we shouldn't be making things so morally and emotionally paranoid in the first place. Rather than copy the technique with a better story, should we put down arms and get back to conversations that seem to be less about our identity? I suspect you would think that this isn't realistic, but what do you think? There's a lot in that. First of all, George, I don't think Alexander Nix is really talking about morality.
No. Nix is not talking about morality. He's talking about how people can be manipulated. That's a very different thing from asking what people really feel about what's right and what's wrong. And that's, what we're trying to do is one, to say what views people have about right and what views are out there and what's right and wrong and how they fit their politics. We talk about biconceptualism, things that are not just absolutely polar, but, where people are mostly progressive but partly conservative, mostly conservative, partly progressive, and how those changes happen over time. And then there's another very important thing. We are suggesting that the nurturant parent model fits the way America's ideas and ideals have been developed from the beginning. That as we've said, for example, we have a government of, by, and for the people. That is central to what this country is about. It is the opposite of what strict father morality says, where it says instead of a government is for the people, that is, it's responsible for the well-being of its citizens, they say no, everybody is responsible for their own well-being. Period. There is no such thing as the government responsible for the well-being of its citizens. That goes against the idea of a government of, by, and for the people. Similarly, from the beginning of the country, you had the idea that citizens care about other citizens and work through the government to provide public resources for the benefit of everybody, businesses and individuals, so that they can be free and promote their well-being. We've talked about this before. And that is why we have public resources that are important for private life and private enterprise. You can't have a business or a private life without using public resources. And this goes against what conservatives believe. That's what we're doing. We're looking at American ideas and ideals and promoting them.
So telling the truth and trying to make people more aware of our values for the purposes of greater participation in democracy, more citizen engagement and awareness is very different from manipulating people to not vote or to vote for people who will harm the country or harm their economic interests, or getting people terrified of fake stories that are not real in order to influence their vote one way or the other. I think that's kind of what at the heart of what you're saying.
It is, but there's one more part of it. There are many people so turned off by how ugly politics has become that they don't want to go to the polls and vote, that they don't care about elections. Recent surveys of millennials and Latinos have shown that they're not that interested in the 2018 elections. They may or may not vote. They're not sure, but many of them will not bother to go to the polls. And my response to that is that you vote. Everyone votes either going to the polls and voting for what they believe in, or staying home and voting against what they believe in. Because when you stay home, you help the other side. That is, by failing to give your vote, you're giving their votes you're giving the other guys an extra vote.